This video is sponsored by Describe. Hi folks, this is a video I meant to put out at the very beginning of the month, but thanks to the election and our power getting shut down to combat local wildfires, I wasn't able to work on it at all until last week. And this video really would have been a lot more relevant in the lead up to the release of the new Dungeon Master's Guide. Now the new book is already out, I don't know how many people are looking for information about the old version. But if you could just do me a favor and just pretend, maybe we just pretend I got this video out before the release of the new DMG, that would be a big help to me. Okay? Cool, here we go. The 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide is not as good as it could be. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Even the designers of the game are currently working on a new version set to come out very soon. And when discussing the appeal of a new Dungeon Master's Guide, they specifically point to the failures of the previous version.
The new Dungeon Master's Guide is a chance for us to apply some of the feedback that we've gotten on the Dungeon Master's Guide that came out in 2014, and to do some things we didn't have the time for, or the budget for.
That's not exactly the way you talk about a book you're completely proud of. Remember, this is a commercial, and they're saying the reason you need to buy their new product is because they did a bad job last time. Which, I mean, I guess that's not a terrible approach, to be honest. It worked for Domino's. However, time flattens nuance, and throughout the lifespan of 5th edition, the narrative, the common wisdom around the DMG, has shifted from it not being as good as it could be, to it being completely useless. Someone I know and respect once described it as about as useful as a screen door on a submarine, and I think that's probably true for them. They're not somebody I find to be prone to hyperbole. But that's not true for me. When talking with a lot of my fellow dungeon tubers, it seems like I'm one of the only ones who still actively flips through the Dungeon Master's Guide and gets any use out of it. Ginny D made a video about how she read the DMG for the first time this year, but let's be clear, that's true for a lot of dungeon tubers. And in fact, even for the ones who have read it, it seems like I've gotten a lot of use out of some sections of the Dungeon Master's Guide that everyone else hasn't really gotten any value out of. It seems like everyone else just uses the magic items chapter and maybe tried to build balanced encounters before giving up on using the math in the book, but I've read through the whole book and gotten a lot of use out of many other sections of the book that I never hear anybody else discuss. Now, I'm not going to pretend it was secretly good the whole time. I've always maintained that the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide is better across the board, and maybe we'll talk about that some other time. I personally have gotten a lot of use out of some sections of this book, occasional use out of others, and then there are still some huge sections of the book that I just don't use at all. And so here, before the publication of the new 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, which is not out yet, I want to briefly run through my experience with the 2014 DMG, and talk about the sections I use in my games. Before I begin, if you're on social media, first of all, I'm sorry. And second, Twitter just got too toxic, so I finally had to bail. I'm on Blue Sky now, and what I like the most about it, well, actually what I like most about it is that my feed is not chock-a-block full of dipshits trying to game the algorithm for outrage clicks and Nazis claiming any attempt to silence them is a front to free speech. I can get all that on YouTube. I don't need another app for that. But what I like the most is that rather than just getting a Discover tab full of people I follow and random popular posts, I can flip over to just my following tab. And then I don't get that same endless scroll problem. I just see what the people I follow have posted, in chronological order, and then when I'm caught up, it doesn't auto-refresh. And then I can close the app. And that is really helping me detox from my very ugly Twitter addiction. I haven't completely cured myself of my impulse to constantly check social media, but at the very least, I can use this app that doesn't actively poison my brain, at least not as much, and also that I can close after a couple of minutes rather than getting sucked into some meaningless drama that'll just ruin my day for no reason. And so if any of that sounds nice to you, come follow me on Blue Sky. This is not like an ad or anything, I just prefer it a lot. So my link is down in the description below, come check it out. And if you'd rather just keep your distance from social media in general, God, I envy you so much. Anyway, on with the show. Now, one of the major issues with this book is organization, and I think that's something that the designers are quick to point out when they're promoting the new, upcoming, revised Dungeon Master's Guide that is supposed to be better about this. Obviously, we don't know yet, because it hasn't come out yet. But as an example of the baffling organization of the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, this book opens with advice on building your own campaign setting. Like, that's the first thing they start with. And why? Why hit your new Dungeon Masters with something so daunting right out of the gate? Well, I actually do have a theory about that. If I had to guess, I think it's because a lot of DMs feel like they need to curate their world before they start running their games. And so this book essentially starts with what it assumes these new DMs are going to think they need to do first. How to build a world. There is a quick introduction that spends 2 pages defining the Dungeon Master's role and 1 page describing the types of players, and I made a whole video about that a few years ago about why this page doesn't live up to a similar passage from the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. But then after that, the entire first chapter is just focused on building your own campaign setting, rather than reassuring these DMs that they don't need to build an entire world before their first adventure, or focusing on the essentials a DM needs to know before they start putting together a session, like gathering a group and how to handle different personalities and conflicts at the table. Instead, this book basically confirms a new DM's fear that they actually do have to build their own world before they run their game. And that's a bummer. It's honestly no wonder it's so hard to recruit people to run games of Dungeons & Dragons if this is the opening advice in the How to Run Games book. That being said, I do still think this chapter has some useful advice. It doesn't go as in-depth as I might like, but there is still some useful stuff here. For example, I kind of like that it describes the core assumptions that the game makes about your typical D&D setting, because I think it is really important to know what assumptions the game makes so you can understand the game on its own terms. I think so many people assume that D&D can do anything, and I do think it's more versatile than 5e's detractors give it credit for, but that doesn't mean that it has no opinion at all about the game you're running. It's not totally neutral. The game does make some base assumptions about the level of magic in the world, and the existence of gods, and the prevalence of vast stretches of uncharted wilderness. And then, because the designers have made sure that we're on the same page about what the default D&D setting actually looks like, the book can then offer some examples of how you could deviate from these assumptions in order to create a setting that suits your own sensibilities. For example, one of the core assumptions is that the world is ancient. But then this chapter also points out that you could instead run a game where the world is new, and the civilizations your player characters are trying to save are in their infancy, and the adventurers can't look back at previous generations of heroes. They are instead essentially the first heroes of the first great empires. And when I see that, I actually do get inspired, and I wonder what it would be like to run a game where your heroes are the champions of the world's first big city-state. It would be like some of the flashbacks in Eternals, where the protagonists fight monsters inside of ancient Babylon. Well, I guess they would just call it Babylon, and literally become figures of myth. And this is the frustrating dichotomy of reading this book. If you're coming to it as a new Dungeon Master, it really leaves a lot to be desired. However, if you were just flipping through it for inspiration, it can be full of really useful passages where even just a single sentence or paragraph can give you an idea for a whole campaign. The problem is, well, that we should expect more from our Dungeon Master's Guide than that. But again, for 10 years, this is the guide we had, and so I just made the best of it. This chapter also includes a brief reference to the Dawn War Pantheon, and I've already made a whole other video about that as well. There's also been some advice about the sizes of different settlements, so you can understand the difference between villages and towns and cities, and I do think that's useful, although it's really weird that this is in a completely different section from the other information about building a settlement, which can be found much deeper into the book. Again, I can only speculate about some of the reasons for the strange organization of this book. There's a lot of examples that just don't make any sense to me either. But then we get a section that I genuinely use all the time. Campaign events. These are major moments in the campaign that change the direction of the story and, indeed, change the course of history for the entire world. Things like the rise and fall of a new leader or an era, cataclysmic disasters, invasions, rebellions, extinctions, discoveries, prophecies, and mythic and legendary events. The book recommends that you use these to shake up the campaign every once in a while, but I actually tend to use them a lot more when I'm building the history of a campaign setting. I'll develop an ancient empire, and then I might roll in this chart to figure out how that empire actually fell. And for that purpose, it's actually extremely useful. I've also used this chart to map out the different arcs of my campaign far in advance, but that's a dangerous habit that I think a lot of us fall into, and we really shouldn't. We get ahead of ourselves and plan out entire campaigns rather than just prepping our games session by session and having a vague plan of where we want to go rather than committing too hard to a story we might not get to tell. And I'm not sure how you would know when you should integrate these campaign-shaking events into a game you're running session by session, but I would be down to give that a try at some point. I do still think this is a useful section of the book. But honestly, that's maybe something we'll talk about another time. I'm going to talk a lot more about campaign prep and overarching storylines in some videos next year. And the last really helpful piece of this chapter that I use a lot is the section on tiers of play. It's really helpful to break down a character's 20-level career into 4 phases, so you know what is essentially appropriate for your heroes at any given point in the story. From levels 1 through 4, they're just local heroes. From levels 5 through 10, they're heroes of the realm. From levels 11 through 16, they're masters of the realm, and from levels 17 through 20, they are masters of the world. Again, I don't know if this is full of a lot of actionable advice, but this is really good to keep in mind when you're trying to build level-appropriate challenges for your player characters. And this section does include the chart for what starting equipment a player character should take depending on their level and the level of magic in the game, and I do know that a lot of groups get a lot of good use out of that chart. It's been pretty helpful in a lot of my games as well. And that is all the stuff I used from Chapter 1. I don't really do anything with the advice on factions, I don't find the sections on different playstyles and flavors of fantasy to be all that useful, and I don't ever find myself returning to the advice about tracking time in your game. Like so many parts of this book, I think that topic has been better covered elsewhere. Okay, so Chapter 1 is all about building your campaign setting. Surely Chapter 2 is going to be about practical advice for actually running your game. So let's check out Chapter 2, creating a multiverse. Of course, naturally, that is the second thing you need to know about running a D&D game. Okay, but actually, placement aside, this section is not that bad. Once again, like with the first chapter, these early pages do provide a lot of useful inspiration. They offer some common examples of how the planes might be connected to each other, with such ideas like the Great Wheel, the World Tree, and the World Axis. And then there are quick summaries of other suggestions for how the planes could connect. And again, if you're building your own campaign setting, it's really cool to check these out and get some inspiration for how the planes might intersect with each other. For example, I really like the idea of the one world, where all the other planes are just places within this world that you could just visit. Mount Celestia is a real mountain. The Abyss is an actual bottomless pit. Mechanist is a super advanced city. Acheron is a mighty fortress. The Isles of Elysium are a place that you could just sail to, and so on. Again, I don't think this approach would work for every game, but I would love to play in a game like that. I think it would actually be fascinating. In fact, it might line up really well with that idea we mentioned earlier, where your heroes are legendary figures. It does kind of have a Greek myth vibe to it, where the other planes are just actual landmarks people know about in the world. But if you're not down with the one-world approach, there are other cool suggestions as well, like the Winding Road, which I wish was fleshed out a little bit more, but it opens up an interesting idea. Or the Solar Barge inspired by Egyptian myth, and so on. And then the rest of this chapter is just write-ups of the other planes of existence. And again, if you know you're running a game that will go to lots of different planes, you should definitely flip through this and see what sort of inspiration you could find for different adventures. And especially if you want to do an adventure set in a specific plane, like the Ethereal Plane, or the Feywild, or the Nine Hells, or the Shadowfell, you should start by reading that plane's entry in this chapter. Now, not all these have a lot of detail. I mean, Carceri is literally just 2 paragraphs, and one of them is an optional rule. But I had a GM who was still able to flesh out a full 20th level adventure where he had to break into Carceri and bust someone out, all from just these 2 paragraphs. So again, that's what I mean. This is what's so frustrating about this book. If you treat it more like a series of writing prompts, it's a goldmine. But also, it should probably be more than that. Now, with Chapter 3, Creating Adventures, we finally got some advice on the actual day-to-day tasks of running a D&D campaign. And this chapter is full of charts that I come back to all the time. For example, the chapter gives you 2 types of adventures: location-based and event-based. And for location-based, there's a bunch of charts you can roll on to figure out what goals your characters will have when entering the dungeon or the wilderness. Basically, what is their motivation for this quest, and what the villains are, and the allies, and the patrons of the adventure, and the adventure location, and the adventure climax. For example, I rolled randomly on these charts when writing this script, and I got the following scenario. The player's goal in the dungeon is to find an NPC who disappeared in the area, and pursue a fleeing foe who is taking refuge in the dungeon. I got a natural 20, so I rolled twice, and I took both results. The party also has another goal: seize location of a fortified location such as a fortress, town, or ship. Okay, so the dungeon is a fortress or a castle, and the heroes are trying to take it from the bad guys. The adventure villain is a humanoid cultist, and the players have an ally, an inexperienced adventurer. Their patron, the one who gave them their mission, is a respected elder. For the adventure location, I got a stranger approaches the characters in a tavern and urges them toward the adventure location. So that was the respected elder. And the adventure climax is an ally betrays the adventurers as they're about to achieve their goal. Use this climax carefully and don't overuse it. First of all, that's great advice, not to overuse the twist of being betrayed by your ally. But now, maybe that inexperienced adventurer is actually a bad guy in disguise. Or maybe it's the patron. I don't know, I'd be really interested to see which one makes the most sense. However, that's just for a location-based adventure. We can also choose event-based instead. For example, once again I rolled randomly. The villain's plan is a big event, which means it comes to fruition during a big festival or ritual or whatever. And all the villain's actions are in preparation for that event. I also rolled for the player's goals, and it's to make sure a wedding goes off without a hitch. Okay, so there's a wedding during the big event. That makes sense. Maybe that is the big event. However, there are more charts later in the chapter, which I always assumed were just part of the event-based adventures category, but I guess they're not. But yeah, we have a chart for framing events, major events that can shape the structure of an adventure. These are things like a parade, a coronation, a solar eclipse, a New Year celebration, a funeral, and so on. So yeah, if I was running an event-based adventure, let's roll on that chart of events. It just makes sense to me. And we got an execution. Okay, so this gets me thinking that there's a wedding happening at the same time as an execution. Not on purpose or anything, they're just happening on the same day. And there's a bad guy who's going to do some sort of ritual during the execution. But also, the players have been tasked with making sure the wedding goes off without a hitch. So they have to choose. Do we abandon our posts and stop the evil bad guy, or stay here and try to send word for others to stop the bad guy's ritual or stay the execution? Or do we split the party? And this chapter also has charts for possible moral quandaries, though I think we just covered that actually, and also this chart is kind of ass. And also charts for twists and side quests. This chapter also has advice on building encounters, and we've been talking about how bad this advice is for the past 10 years, so I'll spare you any more discourse on that topic today. And now we're on Chapter 4, Creating Non-Player Characters. And I find the opening charts of this chapter to be pretty useless. You can roll for a distinctive physical characteristic, which isn't bad advice, but I don't tend to need to use this chart. I can come up with colorful NPCs on my own. You can roll for which abilities are high or low for the NPCs, a talent or mannerism they have, traits for how they interact with people, are they argumentative, are they friendly, are they honest, are they suspicious. Then there's charts for NPC ideals, bonds and flaws and secrets, and again, I just don't use any of these. Creating characters is not something I struggle with, and honestly, when I'm creating an NPC, I am far more likely to consider the needs of the story and how the NPC can best serve those. So rolling for random traits doesn't really offer a useful source of inspiration for me. However, then we get some charts about villains, and I use these all the time. Well, okay, one of them. The others, not so much. There's a chart here about a villain's scheme, and you roll a d8 to determine what they want, and then another die to determine their specific plan. For example, you might roll a 3 and get magic. Their scheme is magic? Well, no, because then you roll a d6 to figure out what they actually want. They're trying to obtain an ancient artifact, build or construct a magical device, carry out a deity's wishes, offer sacrifices to that deity, contact a lost deity or power, or open a gate to another world. These are very plot-focused descriptions for what your villain wants, so if you prefer to start with their personality or their background, then I don't know how helpful this might be for you. But I find this to be a really terrific way to start zeroing in on what my villain wants. However, I find the next chart to be functionally useless. It's a list of methods that your villain uses to accomplish their goal, and I don't think it's a bad thing to peruse this list and look for ideas that you wouldn't have thought of on your own. For example, it could be really interesting to come up with a villain who wants to use defamation to get what they want, achieving his objectives through humiliation, or gossip, or slander, or libel, which I guess are basically the same thing.
Slander is spoken. In print, it's libel.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Jonah. However, I don't think this is especially useful as a random chart, and I really don't think it's helpful when pairing it with the chart we just saw. If you roll for the villain's motivation and land on mayhem, and you roll again and determine that the villain wants to enact the vengeful will of a god or patron, then I think it might not work that well when you then roll on the villain's method and land on bounty hunting. A bounty hunting villain could be fantastic, especially for a group of heroes who are a little more cavalier with who they kill, but I don't necessarily know if that's going to make for the most compelling villain who is trying to enact the vengeful will of a god. Or maybe you roll and get influence, and roll again and determine that they want to win a contest or tournament. Well, you could peruse the villain methods list and pick dueling, or impersonation/disguise, or execution, or murder, and then choose or roll for the various forms of murder presented. But if you're trying to create a villain who wants to win a tournament, and you roll for a method, you could land on agricultural devastation. And maybe you're able to figure out how someone could use a drought to win a tournament, but maybe that's not exactly the kind of antagonist I was looking for. Or perhaps you roll and you can land on neglect, which is just kind of nothing. So yeah, I don't really tend to use that chart. I also don't tend to use the villainous class options, the Death Domain Cleric and the Oathbreaker Paladin, and I just made a video about why I don't use character class levels for my villains. You can check that out right here. And that's it from this chapter. I pretty much just use that one chart. Can you believe people say this book is not useful? Crazy. Okay, but then we get chapter 5, Adventure Environments. And again, I actually use these charts a lot when I'm creating a dungeon. First, there's a couple of charts for where your dungeon is located, in a desert, beneath a temple, floating on the sea, and so on. Then there's charts for who created the dungeon, and if you get the result for a cult or a religious group, there's charts for that, and if you rolled humans, you roll for their class and alignment. Then there's a chart to determine the dungeon's purpose: a death trap, a lair, a maze, a mine, a planar gate, a stronghold, a temple, a shrine, a tomb, or a treasure vault. And then you can roll for the dungeon history. What happened to the original creators? AKA, how did it become a dungeon and an adventure location? So once again, let's take these charts for a spin. I rolled and got a dungeon on a mountain peak, created by a cult devoted to elemental air. And that's fitting. Air elemental cultists on a mountaintop. Makes sense? The location itself was their lair, but it was overrun by planar creatures. So maybe a djinn conquered the dungeon along with his army of air elementals and other planar servants. I don't want to mix it up a little bit more than just air elementals. But that's still a really good starting point. I can use that to build out a whole dungeon. And then this chapter has a bunch of stuff that I don't use, like some dungeon hazards. Then we get the wilderness section. I don't use these charts a lot either, but every once in a while, I'll dip into it if I need to roll for a monument or a weird location. Then there's a section on creating a random settlement, and this is not nearly as helpful a tool as a more robust resource, like the book about creating towns and cities, which I discussed before. And that's maybe foreshadowing for something we'll talk about a little bit later on. But you know, if you're in a pinch and just need to whip up a settlement really quickly, these charts are not too bad. They're a good jumping off point for me to then take these ideas and either flesh them out on my own, or use a resource like that Kobold Press book to add a lot more detail. Then we get random encounters for different areas: urban centers, the sea, and underneath the sea. Then we get traps, and I don't really use any of these, but we'll talk about traps another day. That's a whole other topic. Of course, I just went through this process of randomly generating the villains and backstory for a dungeon, and that's all well and good for me, a professional writer with plenty of time to prep for my next game. But if I've got just a few minutes before my game, I don't have time to draw a map, or find thematically appropriate music, or come up with evocative descriptions of the genie and his cumulonimbus companions. But that's where today's sponsor, Describe, can grant my wish and help me run the perfect game. Describe is an incredible website where a team of professional writers can create scenes that you can read aloud in your game. They've got descriptions of magic items, monsters, NPCs, spells, lines of dialogue, pretty much anything you could want. And if you're looking for a last-minute map, Describe has a whole collection of incredible maps you can drop into your game. And each map has descriptions tied to each landmark or region of the terrain, so you can read some fantastic narration to your players without having to write it yourself. And Describe is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit describe.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK, you can save 10% off of your first subscription payment. Once again, that's dscryb.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. Next, we get Chapter 6, Between Adventures. And I do like how the first page of this offers a couple of examples of how to use a overarching story to link multiple adventures. They offer descriptions of two formats, the Quest of Many Parts and the Agents of X. And I do think these are both good examples. I do think maybe there are other options as well, and you know, once again, maybe somebody could spend 2025 working on a whole bunch of videos about how to link adventures into campaigns, and we could dive into this concept in a lot more detail then. But this is still a good start. It's good advice. And then this chapter just says downtime activities, but those are also in Xanathar's guide, so I really don't use the rest of this chapter at all. Okay, now we get the big one, the star of the show. Chapter 7, Treasure. Whenever my friends and colleagues talk about how they don't use the Dungeon Master's Guide, they almost always make an exception for magic items. Like, come on. Obviously, they still read the section on magic items. But even still, I found that a lot of them don't use the other stuff in this chapter. And that's a shame because there's some good stuff here. Like, there are charts of different gemstones you can use whenever a treasure hoard says, you get a gemstone worth this much gold, and I like that those charts exist. I think that's important to include them. Then there's the chart of magic item rarity and how much magic items cost, and I know people have a lot of strong feelings about that. I honestly at this point get the sense that people just want each magic item to have a set price, rather than using a super general chart like this. But I'm also on the record about not liking magic item shops, so that's not a huge issue for me. I really don't get too worried about getting a price point for every specific magic item. You know, unless I really liked a setting provided in the new Dungeon Master's Guide, and maybe there was an entry for a magic item shop that specifically says the vendor buys magic items at the prices provided in the Dungeon Master's Guide, because if that was the case, then I'd argue that maybe including a bare bones chart like this is a bit of a fumble. But of course, that's purely hypothetical. There's literally no way to know what's in that book. It's not even out yet. I don't even know why I brought it up. Anyway, next we have the charts of different treasure hoards, so you can roll for random treasure depending on the challenge rating of the enemy the players face. And then there's the charts that I love to use when handing out magic items. Who created the magic item? What's a detail from its history? What minor property does it have? And what quirk does it have? With this, you can take a simple +1 longsword and give it some personality. Maybe even literally giving it a personality. We'll see. So once again, I genuinely rolled on these charts when writing the script, and so now it is a longsword created by aberrations in ancient times, and it seems to shift or move or squirm when you see it out of the corner of your eye. That's pretty cool, I like that a lot. Another detail from its history is that it was created by foes of a particular culture or type of creature, and if they recognize the item, they'll view the bearer as an enemy. And that's really cool. I could either pick a type of monster that I expect to pop up a lot during the campaign, or I could roll again on that first chart and get something random like the Cult of Elemental Fire, which is what I rolled. But this isn't just a normal longsword, it's also a key that can unlock a chamber or vault or entryway. And it has a little quirk. It makes the wielder covetous, so you become obsessed with material wealth. Now, typically I do not necessarily recommend rolling on all 4 charts. I think that tends to become overkill, especially with lower level magic items. It just feels like a hat on a hat. However, this one got a really cool result right off the bat that made me excited to see what other cool features might complement its nature as an ancient longsword of the aberrant world. And a lot of these ideas actually do work well together. In fact, I'd probably just drop the last result, the covetous nature, because I don't think that really fits as well as the other results. That would work better if it was made by dragons or made to fight dragons, but I don't really associate aberrations with coveting gold. And I could probably still make it work, but the other answers I got just work better. I can keep all 3 of those and just drop that one. And that's how I tend to use these 4 charts. I just roll on all 4 and I pick the 1 or 2 results that are my favorites, or that complement each other really well. And whenever you do that, you create a magic item that will feel more special because it didn't just come out of a book. Next we get the random magic item tables, and these are a companion to the earlier treasure hoard charts. And then we get the magic items themselves, 65 pages full of them. And I used to just pour through these and get so many ideas, for campaigns or adventures or just for cool treasure to give to my players. And unfortunately, I just don't spend a lot of my time perusing this chapter anymore. Part of the reason for that is because I run more pre-written adventures now, and so I tend to use the existing magic items and rewards, or at least use those as a jumping off point. And part of the issue is that I'm rolling for random treasure, and so I don't really peruse the magic items, I just find whatever I rolled. But also, I think part of the problem is that when I get to that phase of working on magic items, whether I'm referencing what's already in the adventure or rolling randomly on charts, I'm typically looking up these magic items on D&D Beyond rather than flipping through the book to find them. And because of that, when I can just type in the name of the item and get the result, that's the end of the process. And don't get me wrong, that is absolutely efficient. But before D&D Beyond came along, if I wanted to find the Deck of Illusions or the Dagger of Venom, I'd have to open the book. And then when I'm on that page, I might see Darren's Instant Fortress, and it might spark an idea. Or as I'm flipping through pages, I might see other magic items that caught my eye, like the Brooch of Shielding, or the Cloak of the Bat. And again, I talked about this a bit yesterday, but this is something that I really want to get better about when I start running games in the new edition. I don't want to entirely work off of D&D Beyond. I like my physical books, and I want to prioritize using my physical books. I can't deny that D&D Beyond is convenient as hell, and because I'm about to run a game for players who specifically requested we create our characters digitally, I did wind up just buying the new core rulebooks on D&D Beyond because I know my players will use them. And besides, I can pull up screenshots of them for videos, so it's also a work expense, and that's honestly even more valuable for me. Being able to grab images for my videos is hugely helpful. But still, when I'm actually prepping my games, I really wish I used the physical books more often. And the fact that I barely ever look at the chapter of magic items is exactly the reason why. This is probably the number one reason other game masters use the book at all, and it's one section I barely interact with anymore. And that just seems like kind of a waste. Anyway, after the pages of magic items, we get advice on making sentient magic items, and a section about artifacts. I love this stuff, and I really want to include more artifacts in my games. I actually put the Eye of Vecna in a game a while back, but my players didn't realize what it was, so they steered clear of it, which was a shame. I wish they'd gotten a chance to interact with it more. Next time, Gadget. Next time. But for now, we move on to Chapter 8, Running the Game. Sure, we're 230 pages into the Dungeon Master's Guide, so now is clearly the perfect time for a chapter called Running the Game. And there's a bunch of discussion here about rules, and I have read all this, but I hardly ever come back to most of it. However, I do use the chart about improvising damage. I think this is really valuable. My friends and I also have really tried to make the chase rules work, but as I've discussed on this channel before, these chase rules are just bad. And then we come to Chapter 9, Dungeon Master's Workshop. Boy, we're just really flying through the book now, aren't we? Almost like I wind up skipping a lot of this stuff. Weird. This chapter is full of optional rules, and again, I've read these. Generally speaking, I don't really use any of them. I've dabbled with the Lingering Injuries chart, and I've always really wanted to run a game that uses the gritty realism rules for rest, but really, the only section of this chapter that I really use with any level of consistency is the guide for making your own monster. If I'm making a monster for my home game, I'll occasionally use this chart, but more often than not, I won't go through the trouble. Instead, I'll just reskin something, or I'll just sort of eyeball it and guess at some stats that might make a good challenge for my players. But when I'm making monsters or evil NPCs for something that I intend to publish, like the PDFs I put up on my Patreon, then I do try to run the monster through this process and try to get as close as possible to an accurate challenge rating, as much as I can with the system we've got. And finally, wow, already? Okay. Finally, we get the Appendices. Appendix A helps you create random dungeons, and I actually did sit in with some friends for a few hours, and they actually spent a whole day creating a dungeon completely randomly and exploring it as they went, using wet erase dungeon tiles to build the rooms as they went, and it was a really interesting exercise to play through for a little bit. But honestly, I primarily use these charts to determine the purpose of different chambers in a dungeon. If we go back to Chapter 5, you might remember that I use the chart for determining the purpose of a dungeon. Is it a mine, or a lair, or a death trap, etc.? Well, with that in mind, I'll come to these charts and I'll read the chart for, let's say, the mine, or the lair, or the death trap, and I'll use them as inspiration when mapping out my dungeon. For example, the mine chart says there's a barracks for miners. If my mine is separate from civilization, then I definitely need to include barracks for the miners to sleep in. However, if it's more like the mines of Craghammer and Critical Role, or the mines in October Sky, and it's in the middle of civilization, I'll assume the players can commute to work. But I definitely still need an office for the mine supervisor, and a storage room for tools and equipment, and some place to hold the ore as it's transported to the surface, and so on. You just go line by line, and you see if you want your dungeon to include those rooms, and then you skip the ones you don't care about. Then you take those ideas and you use them to figure out the map of the dungeon. This is a really useful process for me, and I use these charts a lot throughout my process. I just don't randomly roll on them. Now, this appendix has a bunch of other charts, and sometimes I use some of them, like trap effects, and especially the chart of random books, scrolls, and tomes. It's really hard for me to generate a bunch of those on the fly if I know the players are going to find, like, a library. But that's the main use I get out of Appendix A. Appendix B has a list of monsters by environment, and most helpful to me, a list of monsters by CR. because for some reason the 2014 Monster Manual did not include a list of monsters by challenge rating. Actually, let's be fair, that book should have had both of these lists, but I remember being particularly frustrated that the list of monsters by challenge rating was not included in the Monster Manual. Appendix C has maps. Just like a bunch of random maps for your game. A windmill, a tavern, a handful of dungeons, a town, and a city? Interesting, I didn't know that. And then Appendix D has Dungeon Master Inspiration. This is a list of books that are meant to serve as inspiration for running your game. However, something that I hadn't noticed until now is that this list is really different from the typical DM inspiration lists. Going all the way back to the first Appendix N in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, the focus was always on works of fiction that could inspire you to run similar games. The Lord of the Rings, Conan, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, H.P. Lovecraft, that kind of thing. And in fact, Appendix E in the 2014 Player's Handbook has a lot of that kind of literature. It adds more recent works as well. Series like A Song of Ice and Fire, Earthsea, Wheel of Time, Gentlemen Bastards, Mistborn, Discworld, and some standalone books like Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King and Throne of the Crescent Moon by Saladin Ahmed. And maybe somebody at some point plans to discuss some of these books from the appendices in future videos. We'll see. I don't really have time to do that right now, but I would like to. But I had completely forgotten that this Dungeon Master's Guide actually has a very different appendix. It focuses on books about game design, storytelling, creative writing, and the history of D&D. And that's a really interesting choice. Like, I get not wanting to just recreate Appendix E from the Player's Handbook again, like, that's fair enough. But I don't even think I'd noticed that this appendix is all about fostering your creativity and your writing abilities. I mean, we literally get Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, The Anatomy of Story by John Truby, and Story by Robert McKee. Those are like the screenwriting books. I kind of wish I'd known how interesting this appendix was. I probably would have come back to it more often, maybe even focused on making some videos about these books. Oh well, I can just focus on whichever books are referenced in the Appendix N equivalent for the 2024 books. Because certainly since the 2024 Player's Handbook didn't have an Appendix N equivalent this time, the new Dungeon Master's Guide will, right? I mean, I wouldn't know, because it hasn't come out yet, so I guess we'll find out when I pick it up and read through it. Now, having gone back through this book with 10 years of critiques fresh in my mind, it is really easy to see why this book is so underused by the community. I honestly think the biggest mistake it makes is that it just doesn't feel that helpful for a new Dungeon Master who is just coming into the hobby through 5th edition. And I've talked before about how I don't think the creators behind D&D really realized just how many new players they were going to get, and I think we can actually see that reflected in the quality of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Or rather, the lack of quality. So, unfortunately, because it doesn't feel like it was designed with new GMs in mind, the formatting alone hurts this book from the jump. However, the other weakness of the DMG is that it just cannot get into any of these topics with as much detail as a more dedicated resource could. If you want charts of fantastic locations, you could use the 1 or 2 charts in this book, or you could use these several charts Mike Shea included in each of his Lazy DM books. If you want traps, you can start with a few pages of them that are in this book, or check out a whole book of them from Cubicle 7. And the reason so many of us have so much to talk about on our YouTube channels, or on podcasts, or blogs, or social media, or Substack newsletters, the reason we have so much advice for new Dungeon Masters is because this book kind of dropped the ball. Because obviously this book had to make some choices about what subjects to include and which ones they didn't even think to offer any advice about. And sure, the creators didn't really know what 5th edition was yet, the community hadn't really taken the game for a spin, so the designers were just trying to do their best to figure out what might be helpful. But there are definitely some major gaps, and some stuff that they did include but just missed the mark on. I mean, I have so many videos that I've linked in the description of this video where I dive into a lot of detail on a topic that's only touched on briefly in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And in making this video, I found even more things that I could do deep dives into. Because even if I agree with something in this book, there's still so much room for more nuance or guidance or examples or counterpoints, things this book just can't get into with the limited space it gives to each topic. However, ultimately I don't think that makes this book completely, entirely worthless. Maybe that's just copium. Like, considering how much of this book I skipped, this video is hardly a ringing endorsement of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Which is fine, they're about to retire it since there's a new version coming out pretty soon. But also, as I discussed earlier, literally, almost every time I'm coming up with a new villain, I'll pop open the NPC chapter and I'll make a roll. When I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with my next dungeon, I'll roll in those charts for the dungeon's location and creators and history and purpose. I really like using charts to serve as a writing prompt, just to get something on the page to serve as inspiration. It's the old Finding Forrester approach, just get something down on the page until you feel your own words flowing.
You're the man now, dog.
But this exercise of revisiting the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide definitely made me a lot more excited to check out the 2024 DMG, once it comes out. Because I still know there's going to be stuff in there that they can't get into with as much substance as we might like, so there will still be a place for other supplements to fill in those gaps. I have no doubts about that. But I also feel like we haven't really seen Chris Perkins get let off the chain in a while. I referenced this before, but Did you know that he used to have a column on the D&D website, sharing stories from his weekly games and writing articles about the advice you could learn from how he handled certain scenarios? I ask that because you sure as hell wouldn't have had any idea that was the case from reading the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. But based on how Chris Perkins talks about the 2024 DMG, I know it won't come close to actually reading those articles where he has complete freedom and no boundaries, but I'm still pretty optimistic that Perkins and his team can at least make something better than this. And considering that I still get a lot of use out of this version of the DMG, I'm willing to bet I'm going to enjoy the new version a lot. You know, whenever it comes out. Hopefully pretty soon by the time you're watching this video. It should be right around the corner. And scene. Thank you for playing along. I really appreciate that. Now, can you do one more thing for me? Can you like this video? Actually, 2 more things. Can you like this video and subscribe to the channel? Actually, sorry, I meant 3 things. Can you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell? And that's it. Actually, sorry, don't hate me, but it is 4 things. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and check out my Patreon or my YouTube memberships. You don't have to support me if that's not in your budget or you don't see anything that excites you. That's totally fine. But just pop by and see what you think. See if anything strikes your fancy. And that's all. Okay, for real, that's all. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Okay. 5 things. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, check out my Patreon or my YouTube memberships, and check out my Discord server. There's a great group of folks there, and you can hang out and talk about new videos, and talk about the new games that are coming out, like Draw Steel and Daggerheart, and talk about episodes of Critical Role, and maybe some other actual play shows. It's a great time. And that is all. For real. That's all. I didn't say anything about the newsletter. Okay, 6 things. There are 6 things. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, check out the Patreon or the YouTube memberships, your choice, check out the Discord server, and sign up for the newsletter. Okay, that's it. We got them all. Thank you for your patience. In this video, we talked a little bit about those creative writing resources in Appendix D, so along those lines, I would actually love for you to check out this video about the difference between writer's block and burnout. I think it is really valuable as a resource for game masters to just get their heads on straight. Until next time, play fair and have fun. Shit, that's 7 things. The video is 7 things. Okay, like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, check out my Patreon or my YouTube memberships, join my Discord server, and sign up for my newsletter, and watch the video. That's it. That is all the things.